My boyfriend lied to me for 3 years. Turns out his ex was actually his girlfriend of 10 years. Hey Reddit. When I first met Jake, he was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He was charming, kind, and made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from that night on, we were inseparable. He told me he had been single for a little over a year, that his last relationship ended because they grew apart, and that he was ready for something new. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He had no signs of a double life, nothing suspicious that made me question his past. For 3 years, we built what I thought was a strong, loving relationship. We talked about our future, traveled together, and even moved in with each other. He met my family, my friends, and I had met his brother and a few close friends as well. It all felt so real, so right, until everything came crashing down. The first sign that something was off came when I found a random piece of jewelry in his car. It was a delicate gold bracelet, nothing extravagant, but it definitely wasn't mine. I picked it up and asked him about it, expecting a quick explanation. He barely looked at it and shrugged, saying it must have belonged to his sister when she borrowed his car last week. Something in his tone made me pause. Jake never really talked about his sister much, and the way he brushed off my question felt calculated. I let it go at the moment, but it left an uneasy feeling in my stomach. A few weeks later, I noticed something else. His phone, which he normally left around without worry, was suddenly always face down. He had also started receiving calls at odd hours and would step away to take them, claiming they were work-related. I trusted him, I really did, but the small things were starting to add up. Then, one night, my entire world changed. Jake had gone to bed early, and I was up watching a show when his phone, which he forgot on the kitchen counter, started buzzing repeatedly. The name that popped up made my heart stop, Samantha. I recognized the name because I remembered him mentioning her in passing once. She was supposed to be his ex, the woman he had dated for a few years before me. Seeing her name flash on his phone at midnight didn't sit right with me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up the call. The second I answered, a woman's voice came through, laced with anger and frustration. She didn't ask who I was. Instead, she went straight to the point. She asked why Jake wasn't answering her calls and if he was still coming home. Home. The word sent a chill down my spine. I stayed silent, processing what she had just said, and she must have sensed something was wrong because her tone shifted. She asked who I was, and before I could answer, she said something that made my blood run cold. She told me she was his girlfriend and had been for the last 10 years. I felt my hands start to shake as I hung up. My mind was racing. There was no way. This had to be a mistake. Jake had been with me for 3 years. We lived together. He talked about marrying me one day. But the way she spoke, the certainty in her voice. It was like she had no doubt in her mind that she was the only one in his life. I didn't wake him up that night. Instead, I stayed awake, scrolling through our messages, looking at our photos, trying to piece together how this could even be possible. How had I missed the signs? How had he managed to juggle 2 relationships for so long? The next morning, I confronted him the second he woke up. I didn't hold back. I told him I knew about Samantha, that I had spoken to her, and that he needed to start explaining, fast. His reaction was what shocked me the most. He didn't get angry. He didn't even try to deny it. He just sat there, silent, as if his entire world had just been exposed. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he admitted it. Everything. Samantha wasn't his ex. She was his girlfriend. His real girlfriend. The woman he had been with for a decade. He had met me at a time when things were rocky between them, and instead of ending it, he started a second life with me. He claimed he never meant for it to go on this long, that he loved me too, and that he kept telling himself he would end things with her but never did. When I asked him how he managed to pull it off, he told me that work gave him the perfect cover. He traveled often, and whenever he was away for business, he was actually with me. When he was with her, he told me he was out of town. Every little business trip, every sudden work emergency, it was all a carefully constructed lie. I sat there, listening to him confess to 3 years of betrayal, and all I could feel was rage. Rage that I had given this man everything, trusted him completely, and he had been leading a double life right in front of me. I asked him the one question I couldn't shake: why? Why did he do this? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He told me he didn't have an answer, that he was selfish, and that he didn't want to lose either of us. I packed a bag and left that same day. I didn't care what he had to say after that. I refused to be some side character in his twisted story. But this wasn't over yet. Because the moment I left, Samantha reached out to me again. And what she told me made me realize that Jake's lies ran even deeper than I could have imagined. Update. After I left Jake that day, I found myself wandering aimlessly, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned. I had nowhere to go immediately, so I checked into a small hotel nearby just to clear my head. I ignored Jake's calls, his texts, the desperate voicemails he left me, all saying he could explain, that he didn't want to lose me, that he made a mistake. But I had heard enough of his explanations. There was nothing left to salvage. What kept running through my mind was Samantha, this woman who had been in his life for a decade, the woman he had shared a home with while lying to me for 3 years. That night, I decided to call her back. I needed answers, not from Jake, but from the only other person who had been deceived just as badly as I had. When she picked up, I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. She sounded drained, like she had been crying for hours. The first thing she asked me was how long I had been with him. When I told her 3 years, she let out a bitter laugh, followed by a long silence. And then, she told me the truth, her side of the story. Samantha and Jake had been together for 10 years, but their relationship wasn't as perfect as I had assumed. She told me there were times she felt like he was pulling away, times when he was distant, distracted, constantly traveling for work. She had always suspected something but never had solid proof. Every time she questioned him, he had a reason, an excuse, something that made her doubt herself instead of him. But what she didn't know, what she had never even imagined, was that the reason he was distant was because he had been building a life with me. Then she dropped a bombshell that made my stomach twist. She wasn't just his girlfriend. They were engaged. He had proposed to her 2 years ago, during a trip to Paris, a trip I remember because he had told me he was away on a business conference that week. She even sent me pictures of them in front of the Eiffel Tower, of the ring on her finger, of him looking at her the same way he used to look at me. I felt like I was going to be sick. While he was promising me a future, he was literally planning a wedding with her. The betrayal hit me in ways I couldn't even put into words. He didn't just lie, he stole years of my life, years that I could have spent with someone who actually loved me instead of using me as a backup plan. But Samantha wasn't done. She had more to say, and what she told me next made me realize that Jake's deceit went even deeper than I thought. Another update. After hearing everything Samantha told me, I knew I couldn't just walk away quietly. I wasn't the type to seek revenge, but Jake didn't deserve to walk away from this unscathed. So, I made a decision. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who he was. But first, I needed to see him one last time. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, but because I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized his lies had finally caught up to him. I texted him, telling him I would meet him at our apartment. The second I walked in, I saw it on his face, relief. Like he thought I was coming back. Like he still had a chance to fix this. He reached for me, but I stepped back, disgusted. I told him I had spoken to Samantha, that I knew everything. The moment I mentioned her name, his expression shifted from relief to pure panic. He tried to talk his way out of it, saying it wasn't what I thought, that he never meant to hurt me, that he had planned to leave her for me. I laughed in his face. Leave her for me? The woman he had been with for 10 years? The woman he proposed to? The woman who had a wedding dress sitting in her closet, waiting for a day that was never going to come? He had the audacity to act like I was the one he wanted when he had spent the last 3 years making me the other woman. I told him I wasn't here to argue, that I was done with him, but that he needed to know. Samantha knew everything now, and she wasn't going to stay quiet. His face drained of color. That's when I realized, he wasn't just scared of losing me. He was terrified of losing everything. Because Samantha wasn't just his fiancée. She was also his business partner. They had started a company together years ago, built a life together, and now, with her knowing the truth, his entire world was about to implode. I left that night feeling lighter than I had in days. But the story wasn't over yet. Because Samantha wasn't done with him either. Final update. In the weeks that followed, Jake's life crumbled. Samantha didn't just break off the engagement, she took him for everything he had. Since they co-owned their business, she consulted a lawyer immediately, ensuring that she would get her fair share, leaving him scrambling to keep things together. From what I heard, clients started pulling away, not wanting to be associated with the mess he had created. But the worst part for him? Word got out. Samantha made sure that everyone in their social and business circles knew exactly who he was. She didn't hold back. Friends, colleagues, even family members, all of them found out about his double life. He went from being a respected businessman to a joke overnight. And the best part? Samantha and I stayed in touch, and together, we made sure he would never be able to pull something like this again. As for me, it took time to heal. It wasn't easy processing 3 years of lies, of manipulation, of realizing that the man I loved never really existed. But I found strength in knowing I wasn't alone. Samantha and I, despite everything, became friends through our shared betrayal. We helped each other move on, supported each other, and in a strange way, found closure in the fact that neither of us had been crazy for suspecting something was off all those years. The last I heard, Jake moved to another city, trying to start over. but I doubt he'll ever truly escape the consequences of his actions. Because no matter where he goes, the truth will always follow him. And as for me? I've moved on. I've learned to trust again, to open my heart again. But this time, I know the signs. And I'll never ignore them again.